Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Wrap It. This one's called Emboss Like a Boss because we're going to be doing 2 different types of embossing on the side doors of this car. So what we're going to be doing is taking you through the design process of how we created this graphic and the emboss file that goes with it, the printing, and then the application processes of both the emboss underneath the print, and then the embosses on top of the print as well. James, do you want to talk us through this material a little bit and what we're going to be using here?
Yeah, again, we're just using a Graphitip film. The next one I'll be using a different material, but this is actually a wrap media, so not a print media. It's actually a pearl white, so it's got a metallic sheen to it. It's actually a slight satin finish, and normally you just wrap a car in pearl white, but we've decided to print onto it, and as you can see, it's just made the new VG2 inks go iridescent. They've got sort of a metallic sheen to them. Now, this hasn't been laminated yet, so we will show you that. Whether we put a gloss or a satin lam on it, we're going to do a few experiments. And we have selected a polymeric wrap film to be underneath for the cut emboss effect. Yes, we probably should use a cast because typically with vehicle wrapping, compatibility is really important. So when you're laminating 2 films, you'd always put a cast with a cast and a polymeric with a polymeric. Just to keep costs down for future application and work, we've decided to go with a polymeric wrap film. So we've got the thickness of a polymeric. We've got conformability if we're going over any curves, and we've got the life expectancy of the film. But again, cost slightly lower because effectively we're cutting in vinyl the same area as the wrap film. So it'd effectively be using 2 lots of wrap film, which can get very expensive. So we've just decided to use like I said, a polymeric wrap film underneath. We've cut it, we've weeded it, we've put application tape on it. What we've also had to do is why this print is in place is because we've had to decide where we want the print to be, align it with these magnets, and then we can then decide where the embossed cut vinyl has to be underneath. So in a minute, we'll show you the design, Joe will show you the design, and then we'll just show you how we've positioned the embossed effect underneath.
Yeah, so with the design part, we started off by getting this sort of vehicle graphic race wrap look graphic, and we've kind of picked it apart, and we've decided on this one because it's got a nice amount of the pearl film showing through, and we've got kind of like similar-ish colour to the actual base colour of the car. The elements of the design, like these hexagons that you can see, we're going to talk you through the full sort of design process, but we were going to use those as part of the emboss. Some of them are going to match up to the print, and some of them aren't. So we're going to see parts of these sort of hexagon shapes coming through the white underneath, as well as the actual solid hexagons that you can see over there. And these sort of shards that are coming through the graphic, here we've married them up perfectly to the print. So the cut's the exact same file as the print underneath. And where you can see we've got these drop shadows, that's going to really sort of stand out when we've got these elements popping off. And then under here, instead of marrying up to the shards, we've gone with a different shard design. So they're going to be underneath, not aligned to the print. So it should look a little bit sort of mishmashy and different. And it also makes it easier for us when we're lining it up because we don't have to line up the whole thing.
Yeah, so we're going to start this end where we know they have to line up. So normally I'd start an application in the middle. When we put the digital print on, we'll probably start this end and work away because registration that end is not as important.
So, as I said, we'll take you through the design. But what we've done, just so that we could lay this up on the car, is we printed out our 2 files so to help us see where they sit on the car. So this is our embossed file. This was actually all merged into one, which you'll see. And this is going to be the cut template that we've cut onto the vinyl underneath this. And then this was the wrap design, showing us where the rest of it's going to go. And as we said, we're going to emboss the bits underneath so that this film will sort of pop off on those parts. And then we're going to stick some elements on top as well. So we've cut out a few of these different shards, a few of these shapes, a few of the hexagons, which are going to go back on top afterwards. And you might be able to see it there. There's a sort of little drop shadow here where it says vehicle graphics. And we've taken some of this pearlescent film, and we've done some resin-doming.
Resin-doming, so liquid lens. So it's a really reputable UK brand. They do a great doming product, and I've been wanting to try this for a long time. So we're actually going to cut on the print and cut machine, resin them, so you get a real, we're trying to show sort of 3-dimensional again. This is, we used on the last webinar, a textured vinyl. This is showing how we can create texture and 3D effects, but just using different vinyls without using necessarily a textured wrap film.
Yeah, so we've cut those out, and that's going to give a much more emphasized emboss with that resin doming, because it's a good couple of millimeters with a nice sort of soft edge. We could even have done that underneath as well on certain places, but we're going to put it back on top to really make those bits stand out. But embossing's, you know, it's subtle, but it's also, you know, you'll definitely see it, especially when you catch it in the light. And we've got a print graphic, so it might, you know, detract from it a little bit, but you know, if you're just using color change films, you can use embossing to just add a little bit of detail, or you know, a pattern, or
because we had loads of
or,
ideas and we're doing this now. We've sort of shown you the concept. We'd like you to run with it. So we've done experiments of using the sort of lizard skin effect vinyls and wrapping over those, or maybe using a leather effect vinyl underneath for the embossing and then wrapping over. But for this particular one, we didn't want to overcook it, so we've just used a standard gloss vinyl and then we're going to wrap over it. But do by all means send us images, send us videos of other embossed effects you've done, because we'd love to see how creative you can be with it.
So next up, we're going to talk you through the design, how we pick that apart to create the emboss file and the print file, and then you'll come back and we're going to get going putting down the cut vinyl underneath. So we set up this design using Adobe Illustrator, and as you can see here, we brought in the template for the vehicle so that we could adjust the graphics to the correct size, put that on a separate layer and gave it a transparency, so gave the graphics in front so that they had a transparency against that background so that we could see that we were working to the correct scale. The graphic that we brought in had a white front end and a black back end with lots of different elements to the graphic, so we had to go into this graphic. It was a download from an image bank site, and start picking it apart, putting all the different information onto different layers. The black lines that you can see here in the background, we sort of turned them blue, thought it looked a bit busy and that we might turn those off. There was lots of elements of the design that were hidden behind multiple layers, which doesn't really help when you're printing, so we had to go into these layers and adjust some of these elements, taking them out and moving them to suit our position. We wanted to have a bit more white space in the design file, so we decided to get rid of all of those lines that were in that white space there and adjust the shards and the angles and these hexagon shapes so that they were in the correct layout when it comes to the actual design. It was a little bit busy, so we also went in and deleted some of these elements and just shuffled them over so that they sort of worked a little bit better placement wise. Well, this video has obviously been sped up, but as you can see here, we had to go in and clip certain parts, remove certain paths and nodes so that we didn't have any stray information in the wrong place. Because we were going to be using the same information to create the emboss layer, we needed to make sure that everything was, you know, as we wanted it to be and as expected. So we used the colors from the Roland color systems library so that we could match these to specific output. Brought in that library into Illustrator and started moving all of these shapes about and adding the colors that we were after. As you can see, those two shards, we were trying to aim that they wouldn't go over the top of the handles, as you'll see James explain a little bit later. And we put in some text over the top that was going to be on the flat section of the front door there, and that's going to be our emboss. So we added some effects, and then we separated that onto another layer to be able to use that to cut ready for our resin doming. Here we can see that we're starting to pick apart the different elements of the design that we wanted to put onto another layer to create just the cut information. So we got rid of a bunch of the information, we had to merge some of these shapes, and we kept some of them in the same position as they were on the print file, and we moved some of them to a different location so that the emboss wouldn't line up everywhere to give us a little bit more depth. Here you can see just sort of turning on and off the layers between the print layer and the cut layer just to check that everything lines up, and that the cuts also had a bit of differentiation so they weren't all in exactly the same place, again to give us a little bit more depth and a little bit more, I don't know, I guess interesting embosses underneath certain parts of the design. This meant tracing around certain elements and then copying and pasting certain elements from the print layer and putting these onto that cut layer as well. There was a lot of information that went outside of our sort of print area, so we deleted a bunch of that here. And as you'll see, we went to split this information onto the two layers so that we could export the two different design files. This all took a little while. There you can see the blue merged shape. That's going to be just the cut information layer, and then the print layer to go on top. So here we have the final sort of ready to output PDF page size so that we got the correct size. You can see that shape along the top that's going to go along the top of the A-frames of the door windows, and some elements of the design off of the main print area that we were going to use for extra embossing when it came to the resin doming. So this is taking all of that information that we wanted just to be an emboss and putting it onto a single layer, converting that to just be an outline with a cut line. And then again, just turning on that print layer and double checking that everything lines up before exporting. We then could obviously turn off the vehicle outline and just export two different PDFs, one for the print and one for the cut, which were exported to the VG2. And you can see here those thin pink lines, those are the embossed cut lines underneath. And we could just highlight those whilst making the top layer translucent so that we could see where all of our cut information was going to sit underneath the print. This was really useful when it came to, you know, checking that everything was going to line up. In the end though, two PDFs exported, sent to the VG2, one print, one cut, and as you can see the design kind of worked pretty well in the end, and the PDF page size gave us the correct size for the material and for the output that we were after. And this was just the little export again for the vehicle graphics, for the extra resin doming pieces. The same in the top left there that you can see on the artboard. Those pieces were exported ready for some extra resin doming as well.
Okay, so as you can see, this is the cut vinyl file, so it's just cut in a blue polymeric wrap film. Now, one of my concerns is, because these elements line up with the printed elements, I'm going to, for now, avoid the handles, so we don't have to wrap the handles in a specific file that tallies up. So we're going to try and avoid those handles. And again, you can just see that we can install vinyls without taking the handles off. I've just taken a loop out of where the handles sit, and that will help us to position it. When I come to apply the pearlescent wrap film over the top, I will be removing the handles and wrapping behind the handles, and then we'll decide whether we want to wrap the handles separately. At some point in the webinar we will show you handle wrapping, we'll show you some small detail work, wing mirrors, handles. But for the purposes of the exercise, we're going to avoid the handles now. When we come to put the pearl on, we'll go behind the handles. So yeah.
So we've lined up this side, as we showed you earlier, with the printed out graphic from our design file showing us where we're going to start. And James, how are we going to attack this? We're going to start at this end, revealing the whole thing. We're going to do it bit by bit.
Yeah, we're going to break it down into sections. We're probably going to use this little gizmo from Sign Gear, so we'll be able to cut through the backing paper just to reveal a slit. So then we can start effectively towards the back area, reveal one section, and then apply working down towards the front of the vehicle. Again, it is an airflow cut vinyl, which is making life a little bit easier as well for the embossing. So this is airflow, so if we want to lift it, it shouldn't be too grabby. But let's see how we want to go. So we're just going to do a little bit more preparation. Again, we have thoroughly cleaned the vehicle. We're not going to keep cleaning in these webinars. You can look at previous webinars and we take you through the whole cleaning process. So for this, we're just going to show you application. It's relatively flat surface. So we're just going to break it down into sections, and we're just conscious that we're covering the car completely. It's rolling round underneath the sill. All the elements run up to the rubbing strips. When I come to wrap the pearl, I'll probably wrap these door trims. So we'll do those as well, not with the cut file, but we'll wrap them with the pearl film. So I think we're ready to start, if you are.
Yeah, brilliant.
Okay, so I just wanted to show you this special tool, this slicer. So it's a double blade. There's two blades in this edge knife, guard knife. So in theory, we can now just draw that down the backing, and we lift away, revealing a certain section of film, just a small section. So once we've cut through this, we've put it back up against the car. We've put some markers with masking tape showing us, because we positioned it. So now we put some markers on the car so we can take this away from the car, cut this single piece of application tape away. It now means that when we go to apply this to the vehicle, we can just peel one piece away as we're installing the vinyls. We don't have to peel this whole section off, back to here, slice through it, and try and get all that down without any dust or contamination, it now means we can reveal from the centre out. So it just takes all the stress out of it.
Happy with that?
Yep. So once we've got it back in position, we now know it all lines up. Now all I'm doing is sticking that seam down.
So we've just got a sort of 20mm strip down the middle there, which we've revealed, which we're now going to fix it in place with that little strip.
I'm not going to roll over that dimension just yet, because we want to get the bulk of the vinyls down. Then I can squeegee it as it rolls over the top and as it rolls around the sill. So now at this position you can remove your magnet, Joe. Take all that film away and we can actually reveal this now, but we're not revealing huge amounts, so we can literally just take that backing back. Again, make sure it's been squeegeed, make sure the application tape is firmly gripping the vinyl. You don't want any bits to come away, we don't want any dust here, so now we can take that back round. And as Joe puts that against the vehicle, I can start to squeegee this down. We don't want it to run out of position, because if this goes out of position it will affect how we put the print down over the top. Again, we haven't talked a lot about squeegee angle. You can generally see the principle. I'm just generally trying to ease the vinyl down. I'm going to feed it into those three-dimensional shapes. As we work it down, we can start to reveal more of the backing. Again, just slow down a little bit as we go over the cut shapes. At least the good thing about application tape is you can kind of see where you squeegeed it and where you haven't, because it tends to go that little bit darker. Again, don't be afraid to use fingers when you're applying. Now, I will swear at Joe later, because again, technically, from a fitter's point of view, we've got all these shapes. That if this starts running out, obviously this can cause a crease. You know, I could stick that down, stick this line down, but get a crease in this connecting line. So it's quite important that everything joins together and you chase it all through.
Easy for you, mate.
Yeah, I was going to say, if I had to do an embossing job and do a design for it, this isn't my favourite design. But you know, that's challenge. That's what these webinars are all about. We're learning all the time as well. So that's got to that edge. Again, we've just dropped it in around the handle, so I'm just coming back to here now. Again, we can't chase the film around the handle. We need to make sure that it sits nicely. I'm just going to take a slight... Oh, no, that's sitting around there okay. Again, at least we know we're not really stretching the vinyl, because application tape doesn't really stretch. So we're pretty confident that we're just laying this vinyl fairly relaxed. Now here, I'm going to put a relief cut, because there's a bit of tension building up. There's no connection between that stripe, that's going to run off the wheel arch, and there. So we can start to put what we call relief cuts in the film, just to take some of that tension out of the film. And again, we haven't quite decided how we're going to finish this, because it's going to run onto the other application we've done, so we'll decide how we're going to finish that at a later date. We'll see where it sits, we'll see what the design looks like, and then I'll decide where to trim and finish that. So again, just have to make sure that those two shapes have connected, and keep rolling those down. Again, I'm just pushing the film away, just so I don't chase the film this way and cause it all to bunch up. Again, I'm reluctant to install that yet, because as we start to run into that crease line, it will make it more awkward to reveal this paper. So I think we can start to flip everything now, and we'll start to work towards the front of the car. Again, I'm not worried about the odd bubble, as I couldn't see them even if I wanted anyway, so I'm just trying to be as thorough as I can. But again, we've used an airflow film or an air escape or a bubble free, depending on which brand you decide to use. But I just know that once I take this app tape off, I can detail it, I can just make sure there's no blemishes, remove any if there are, before we keep on going. But again, I'm just trying to get the bulk of this film fitted. I'm just going to get out of the way so you can see what I'm doing here. And again, in an ideal world, we want perfection on the app taping. We don't want a bubble, we don't want ideally not a join in the app paper even, but again, it would require 1220 app tape if you're going to do this. Just careful of that one, Joe, you'll have to make sure. And that's what I mean about making sure they're nicely squeegeed down, because if they're not, they won't release properly. So just make sure that you're careful as you're revealing the film. Again, airflows tend to come away from the lining paper a little bit easier than on non-airflow vinyl. So when you're weeding, just make sure that you've... I would actually put the cut depth up a little bit when you're cutting these polymeric wrap films, because they are a lot thicker. Also, in an ideal world, I would like... again, I've taken a small video of when I did it, but when you cut the vinyls, I'd like them cut fairly heavy, so it leaves an impression on the silicone paper. So as you're weeding, one of these slips out of position, you can look at the backing paper and reposition it exactly where it was. You wouldn't be able to do that if you'd cut the film too lightly. Okay, so I've now got the flat area down. I don't know if you've got a squeegee, Joe. If you do have, you're quite welcome to finish that top section as I do this lower section. Because we don't have to worry so much about alignment on this front section, you could actually start doing more relief cuts. So we could actually separate the shapes and sort of squeegee them individually if you needed to, just to make life a little bit easier. Again, the odd bubble here, I don't know at the moment whether that's a bubble in the application tape or whether it's a bubble in the vinyl. Either way, it shouldn't be an issue. Again, just try when you're peeling the paper, hold it nice and shallow to the bodywork. Don't pull the paper away from the car, hold it nice and flush. The reason for that is if I pull it away, I could actually lift the vinyl that's stuck to the car. So I want to hold it nice and shallow so it doesn't tear or start to lift the vinyl away. So we've got a slight issue here. Maybe I'll get Joe to zoom in on that in a second and show you what I mean. Nothing that can't be rectified though. I'm just going to show you that in a bit more detail in a moment.
Must have been my bit.
And again, we've got another issue there. Again, very hard to tell when it's got thick application tape or there's creases in the application tape. So again, just take your time with the process and it will pay dividends. I'm going to lift this section. Just being careful not to tear it. Take that kink out and literally just reapply that section. There's also another little point about the airflow films when you're working with them. If you do see a bubble or some air trapped under the film, it's quite tempting just to sort of roll around the bubble. It's quite important to go straight onto the bubble. You're dispersing the air away, so don't roll round the bubble because you'll just collapse all the air channels and the air cannot escape. Very important when you're doing this as well, not to keep letting the film bridge and force it into the trims. It's quite important to actually be careful not to trim the film, but we're going to release the pressure and we're going to feed it up towards the trims. So Joe was obviously just getting a bit nervous there about splitting the vinyl, so I'll put his mind at rest there. So we're just trying to feed that into the trim, so it's not under any pressure. We don't want this wrap film, we don't want the edges to start pulling back. We want nice crisp edges. When I come to wrap the pearl finish, I am actually going to wrap onto these trims. For now I've just shown you that before I de-chrome the car, so I've put a metallic black because it just looks nicer with black around these crims rather than chrome. That's my taste, but I'm removing the dechroming so then we can actually put the wrapped design over the top of those trims afterwards. And I will start to cut some of these edges away. So again, we're going to use a brand new blade. You can use the NT blades, the Swan Morton blades, whichever is your preference. And sometimes these little tiny thin edges are reluctant to stay on an edge, so I'm just cutting those actually back from the edge slightly. We'll still get that embossed effect. And we're going to have to cut not only the vertical joins in the doors, but we'll have to cut along the sill there, just so we can open the doors. And be careful not to open the doors while you're still working on the vehicle. Obviously it will split the vinyl, you'll have to start all over again. Okay, so I'm just running over the whole side of the car with some heat. All I'm looking for is little bubbles, maybe lifting. That means there's air trapped under the film that we didn't get out. I'm making sure that I'm not seeing a reaction to the heat, making sure the film's not stretched in any way, no blemishes, making sure the vinyl's bonded, making sure the edges have been trimmed, tucked in. Again, I'm just noticing a bit of a rough finish down here. I'm going to take that away a little bit more, I think. Oh, those are the offcuts. And there's also a lot of sort of chipping in the paint down this edge, I've noticed. Again, we could have filled it more. That's just from people opening the car, getting in and out, keys hitting it. So this is feeling a bit rough. But again, a lot of that embossing will now hide that. Quite important when you're doing long cuts like that to lock your hand, don't change the angle of the blade. If you start changing the angle, that's when your cut will run out. It's important to have the confidence to hold the blade up against the side of the panel, not cutting on the panel, and make it one continuous cut at the same angle. Don't stop, start, take your knife in and out, you'll never get a nice clean cut. And again, we're just going to follow that by squeegee in at the nice shallow angle, just feed that film in. Maybe don't try and go in one go, it might take a couple of passes. You may want to just run the pad of your finger over it first so it just sits in there nicely. Again, I'll open up the door, we'll run in the door with some heat. We need to not let the film bridge these areas. We're going to trim the film back so we get a nice bond to that edge without it rolling around the edge. So I'll just go ahead and do that now.
Okay, so we've finished laying down our first sort of layer of emboss. This cut graphic, which it might not look much at the moment, but hopefully this is going to really help our graphic to stand out next, which James is going to be applying the main printed graphic over the top of this, lining it up and adding some extra bits as well. So we've got a few of these little sort of shards, a few of the other shapes as additional cuts, so we can always add some extra bits up onto the bits above the windows here. Any other bits that we might need it after we've sort of put on some of the graphic, might see that, you know, it might work having a bit of extra emboss here or there, so we've cut some extra bits as well. We're going to put on that printed graphic, and then we're going to come back and put some extra resin domed pieces, as we said, back on top.
Yeah, that's the bit I'm excited about, to see how that pans out. But and again, this is going to look really abstract until we put the print over the top, which should all make it sort of come together, really. So and then we'll just show you some close-ups of how the emboss looks and how to get that nice crisp look to the embossing. So this is our finished dome effect that Joe's done. It's really important to do this on a flat surface, an optically flat surface, or you won't get a nice even run. It's also important to have a flame torch so you draw out any bubbles in the resin or anything, so you get a nice crisp look to it. Again, the thickness of the resin will depend on how well your cut edge is and how thick it is, and depends on how much doming you pour onto it. The second you put too much dome, it will run off and bleed off, which is a bit of a disaster.
So something I had to do in the design with this was to round all the corners as well. If you've got sharp corners, it's going to be way more likely to spill over the edge. So all of these corners have just been rounded a little bit, and it just helps keep that surface tension when you're pouring on your resin.
So another thing Joe's done is he's applied this to the pearl. So this was the original vinyl we used. He's cut the lettering, as he said, with radius corners. He's weeded it, domed it. Now we're going to produce some more, because these silver pearl letters are going to be sitting on the blue background of the car with the drop shadow, but then we're also going to show you what happens if you put the same coloured dome printed resin onto the same colour underneath. It gives the film the appearance that the vinyl's sort of doming and coming away. So we'll show you two different applications, basically putting a different coloured resin dome onto a different coloured background and to putting it onto the same coloured background, just to show you those different effects. And for me, this is what's going to bring this side of the car to life, this three-dimensional doming effect, thanks to liquid lens. Okay, so we've got the vehicle in the workshop. You can see the embossing's been laid. We've just given the vehicle again another prep. Just a little bit of detailing to do on the car before we put the next print over. Before we start putting the print on, we're going to remove the door handle. So if you can see, we've removed the cover to access the T20 tool, which will undo the grub screw from inside the door. You can see I'm holding the handle out, just being careful not to undo that grub screw too much. On some vehicles that can drop down inside, but then that barrel comes out and then the handle out, and then those little rubber covers will be removed. So now we've got a pretty flat surface to install the digital print to. The door still closes. It's a good idea to put the windows down before you start doing that. Here you can see we're just doing a reveal. So we're just taking that section of backing out. So when we now position that against the car, we can tag that in place. We've already put some markers on with tape. And when we're ready, I can just tack that center line. And then we can reveal from one end. You can see we've got another pair of hands helping here. Makes the job a lot easier. And again, just getting the flat area down first. I'm just being careful because the embossing can cause some issues with installation. You've got to make sure that material doesn't crease or ruck up around the edges of the embossing. But again, I'm just trying to get that flat area down. I'm not revealing too much material. If you can see, I've put a line around the wheels of the car just to stop any dust coming out from the wheel arch area. And we're just getting that flat surface of the door down. So as you can see now, once we've got one side of the graphic down, we can again reveal from the middle, working out. It just helps for alignment. Although we had done some tests previous to installing the vinyls, I found that if the graphic lined up exactly with the embossing, it just wasn't clear enough. You couldn't really see it. Whereas where it was offset towards the front of the graphic, it was much more visible. So I decided to offset the print to the embossing underneath. You can see in this video, you just start to see it appear. Once you've got that flex section of the door, I'm just making sure that we've got a nice neat line as it works into a slight indentation along the lower section of the doors. So I'm just making sure that's worked in and we haven't got any air pockets there as we work towards the front of the car. Again, you can see I've laid silicone paper on the floor. For one, we've got something clean to lie on, and we're going to hopefully minimise any dust by just making sure that all the areas around the car haven't got any dust or dirt. So you've got a nice clean white floor. It also helps with the lighting. When you're working with a complicated design like this, it becomes actually harder to see the actual print. So it's a good idea to have really good. I've got a lot of fluorescent lighting around me there. And the print just neatly finishes as the car goes out of sight on that sill area. Here you can see we're starting to lay the embossing over the top of the wrap. So you can see we've already printed a drop shadow. We actually decided to position these letters by hand, so they're really accurate. It's also technically quite difficult to lift the embossing off because application tape won't work. So here you can see the finished effect. So we've put extra shapes over the top. You can see the nice crisp lines of the embossing. The printed green's a pretty good match for the car, so in a second you'll see the handles go back on. I think it's turned out really nicely, just to have that detail when it catches the light. I've taken the print up onto the trims of the cars and slightly onto the window areas as well. You can see the A-pillar's been wrapped in the same pearl effect print. It also has embossing on the A-pillar and some of those dome resin badges. Yeah, I think it's important when you're looking at this embossing underneath. When you first lay the vinyl, there'll be a slight air pocket around the edge of the cut vinyl embossing. So it's important just to warm the vinyl. At first, just go over it with a glove, just to define the edge so you can actually see what you've got to define. And then once you've gone around it with a glove or a cloth, just get a squeegee and run that also around the edge of all the embossing with some heat. That will help to give you a lovely crisp edge to the embossing and just make it a little bit more noticeable and defined. Yeah, finished result I'm really happy with. It looks great. I've not really seen something done like this particularly before with these different levels. Really catches the light and just makes people look. As I've been driving around, people really notice it. I've had a few people sort of catch their eye and almost want to go up to the car and find out what it is over the top. So definitely something to draw the eye and cause attention to what maybe then be printed on the graphic itself. A little bit more needs to be done on the actual liquid lens, so it'd be good to think about colour overlays and just make sure you print your resin sections with bleed. So when you go to cut the vinyl, the colour definitely goes to the edge. If there's a slight difference in cutting or a millimetre, you wouldn't want, say, pearl to show underneath when you've printed it blue. So just make sure you spend time creating those cut paths nicely.
Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed that. That's the end of the session. We'll just see if anybody's got any questions for myself or James. In fact, I'll kick off with a question that I was thinking throughout rewatching that. James, do you think there's anything that you would have done differently to make that better? What do you think you would have changed?
Yeah, good question. Not a lot, actually. I think it turned out really well. Again, the more time you have, the more detail you can go into. But I'd like to have seen how intricate we could have got the dome resin shapes, and just how much detail we could have added there. And just some of the edges on the resins, just as I mentioned, I think it just cut off at the end there. But yeah, just making sure we've got those shapes really accurate with bleed and the cutting, just to make sure we don't get any other colours appearing. But
Yeah,
no, I'm really happy, and I'd also like to see some of the other colours, how they printed on that pearl material, and more faded colour, I think, rather than blocks of solid colour.
Yeah, I think I agree. When it was a bit of a rush getting those last bits of the emboss done, hence forgot to add a bleed on the cuts. So that was my bad. But again, yeah, I agree on these solid colours. Maybe having some lighter colours coming through might have been it might have looked a little bit more effective. But I mean, for a not a rush job, but the first attempt at it, I think the end result looked pretty good.
Yeah, as with all these webinars, it tends to be a bit of a sharp learning curve, doesn't it? So we don't get a chance to do things 3 or 4 times over the period of months. It's we're trying to produce these quite promptly between each other.
Yeah, and for anybody who's logged on, just so you're aware, if you go to the handouts section, there is a link to the material that we used. And if you're rewatching this later on from the website or YouTube, that was a film. I can't remember the exact name, but it's a graphic tip film with pearl. I think it was a silver pearl wrap film. So I'm sure you can find it from their website. But the PDF is a link in the handouts. Just see if there's any other questions coming in. Not at the minute. Looks like I must have answered most of them, I guess, throughout the session. I thought it looked really good in the end. I like the way you put the graphic going up onto the window a little bit as well. I think that added, like, not an emboss, but like a kind of another little effect to it.
Yeah, sure. And I think obviously the resin, you couldn't do it because you wouldn't be able to put your windows down. So if you are thinking of putting anything on windows, just remember the cast vinyl will stick really well to the glass. And as long as you tuck it below the rubber line, the window can still go up and down. But yeah, I think it adds a lot of interest.
Yeah, and the extra bits, because we did the original just the text as the resin doming emboss, but then we put a few of the other bits on top of the graphic afterwards. I think that really made all the difference, having those pop out. So that was really good.
And again, just when you're looking at the final shots of the finished vehicle, we haven't artworked it all the way to the front of the door because the next webinar, which I don't know if Joel mentioned just yet, but that's going to overlap onto what we've just done. So there's always going to be a section from one design overlapping onto the next. So hence that hard edge on the front of the door of the car, that will be covered up by the next webinar we're doing, the next graphic.
Yeah, that's one of the questions that came in, just seeing if we've got any ideas or designs in place for the next episode. So we are thinking of going down the route of playing with vibrancy, I guess. So reflective, fluorescence, and any other funky films that sort of play with that.
Yeah, we're thinking of glowing in the dark, possibly, weren't we? Using glow in the dark material or something like that.
Yeah. So reflective, glow in the dark, and fluorescent for that front end. So for the bonnet and the two front wings, we're gonna have a bit of a play around and see what we think works best with those materials, and see how we can get some nice effects. And then as we mentioned on the other ones, we're still going to be looking to run a competition as well for anybody to design the graphic to go on the roof as well, or once we've done the front and the other side and then the other rear end. So we've got a couple more webinars left in us before we do the final one, which will be doing the roof competition. Another question that's quickly come in, somebody saying, I noticed that the wheels were covered at one point. What was used to do that, and why did you do it?
Yeah, so that is just nothing more technical than application paper or application tape. So it's just our usual 610 roll of application tape, and I've wrapped it around the wheels, and that is just to minimise dust. So any brake dust, dirt and contamination. That is also assuming you have cleaned the car, cleaned the wheel arches thoroughly, and cleaned the wheels themselves. But I just think it helps to offer that extra level of cleanliness. So also, if the vinyls we're putting onto the car stick to the wheel, they don't stick to application tape, so it's much easier just to peel the vinyl off the wheel. So I think that's a real good tip just for cleanliness. You can get Tyvek type wheel protectors that are a disposable elasticated type product which loop over the wheel, but again, I have application tape in my workshop, so it's easily to hand and it's inexpensive. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Cool, brilliant. All right, I think that's it. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for logging in again, James. And we'll see you guys on the next one, where as we said, we're going to look at some interesting plays on light and glowing and reflective, and we're going to do some interesting things on the front end. So again, we'll go through the design and all the rest of it next time. We'll be back next month with episode 4.
Yeah, thanks all. See you next time.
Cheers.